Wilmington Morning Star, April 28, 1945. Fallen fascist eagle is reported arrested. London, April 27, AP. Swiss dispatches reported tonight that Benito Mussolini, yellow with fear and fury, had been arrested in northern Italy by Italian patriots after being refused entry to Switzerland with his wife and 8 Confederates. There was no Allied confirmation of this report. At the same time, the French press agency reported that former French premiers Paul Reynaud and Édouard Daladier and General Maurice Gustave Gamelin, former commander-in-chief of the Allied land armies, had crossed from Germany into neutral Switzerland. These men have been German captives for years. Capture of the fallen fascist eagle, Mussolini, who in communion with Adolf Hitler dreamed of establishing an Axis world of conquest, was announced by the Free Milan radio and also was reported for the second straight day in dispatches from the Swiss-Italian frontier. An Italian Socialist Party spokesman was quoted by the Milan radio as demanding that Mussolini be turned over to the Italian People's Tribunal for trial. Mussolini arrived at the Swiss border with a convoy of 8 automobiles at 3:45 a.m. yesterday, Bern report said. In the first car were Mussolini and his wife, Rachel, the Swiss radio said. In the second car was the wife of a fascist minister and her child. There were also 8 other Italian officials whose names were not known. A Milan newspaper reported one of the officials was Roberto Farinacci, former secretary of the Continued on page 3, column 4.
The Waterbury Democrat, April 28, 1945. Mussolini's arrest not confirmed. By J. Edward Murray. Rome, April 18, UP. The Italian capital today eagerly awaited the return of its chief balcony performer, Benito Mussolini, whom patriots claimed to have captured to northern Italy. Definite confirmation of Mussolini's arrest still was lacking, but the Italians already were planning his swan song performance in Rome, a trial for collaboration for which the penalty is death. The Rome radio said that Mussolini and his cohorts captured with him will be tried by a people's court. However, it was believed the United Nations War Crimes Commissioner might have something to say about that, along with Mussolini. The partisans claimed to have taken former Fascist Party Secretary Roberto Farinacci, former Propaganda Minister Alessandro Pavlini, former Internal Affairs Minister Guido Bifernegaitti, and Marshal Rodolfo Graziani. Bern reported that El Duce's wife, Donna Rochelle Mussolini, along with several fascist personalities, had been denied entry into Switzerland by the Swiss government. A United Press dispatch from Zurich said that Mussolini's son Vittorio and nephew Vito were with him for some time at Prelezza, 15 miles north of Como. However, the Patriots' reports made no mention of them.
Stars and Stripes Mediterranean, April 30th, 1945. Partisans execute El Duce, 5th in Milan, 8th in Venice. 7th Army enters Munich. Benito Finito. Rome, April 29th. Benito Mussolini, arch-enemy of a free world, has been executed by Italian patriots. His death by a firing squad of partisans was first announced this morning by Radio Milan, voice of the Committee of National Liberation of Northern Italy. 2 British correspondents, Christopher Lumbey of the London Times and Stephen Barber of the London News Chronicle, later confirmed it when they entered Milan ahead of the Fifth Army. Mussolini was shot along with 17 of his henchmen and his last mistress. Today in Milan, the bodies of El Duce and his followers were on display in Piazza Loreto. His capture near Lake Como, while fleeing towards Switzerland in a column of German trucks, was previously reported by the Milan radio. The British correspondents told of seeing the bodies on display in the square in Milan. They said that crowds of Italians swarmed to view the bodies and to revile them. They reported that Mussolini and others, after having been captured near Lake Como, were taken to the village of Galano di Mezzogiorno nearby. There they were tried by popular tribunal and executed at 16:20 hours on Saturday, April 28th. Their bodies were carried in trucks to Milan for public display on the same spot where just a year ago 15 patriots were executed. Rome newspapers, like El Giornale del Mattino and Libera Stampa, spread the news in bold, black headlines. Over all Rome, quickly the report traveled, and crowds gathered around every newsstand and great excitement stirred the people. at a rally being held near Piazza Venezia in honor of the Northern Patriots. Loud cheering greeted the announcement. The men who were shot with Mussolini, or nearly simultaneously, were the cream of the fascist crop in northern Italy. These are some of them: Alessandro Pavolini, Carlo Scorza, Fernando Mezzasoma, Goffredo Coppola, Nicola Bombaxi, Roberto Farinacci, Achille Staracci, and Cloretta Petacci, mistress of Mussolini. Pavolini was probably the chief fascist among them. He was once Mussolini's propaganda minister. As one of a group of 7 in the fascist Grand Council, he used to vote automatically in favor of El Duce. He fled to Florence when Mussolini fell, and at Florence he organized the notorious Black Brigade. He was a fascist party secretary both before and after Mussolini dominated all Italy. Scorza, last party secretary before Mussolini was overthrown, used to be almost a lukewarm fascist. Then after the downfall he wrote a letter to his master, saying he had ever been one of the faithful. The fascists tried him up north, but that letter saved his skin. Then he became the new fascist party's secretary. Mezzasoma and Coppola were lesser lights, but black as night fascists. Mezzasoma replaced Pavolini as propaganda minister. Continued on page 8.
The Key West Citizen, April 30th, 1945. Dead gangster, Benito Mussolini.
The Evening Star, April 30th, 1945. Milan, the end of the road for Mussolini. The bald head of former dictator Benito Mussolini, fallen El Duce of Italy, rests in death across the body of his mistress, Cloretta Petacci, in Milan's Piazza Loreto under guard of Italian partisans. The Duce and his mistress were executed with 17 other fascist leaders near Como and the bodies brought by truck to Milan. This picture was obtained by the New York Times and transmitted by radio. Story on page A3, AP wire photo. Graziani reported executed. Milan, AP. The execution of Benito Mussolini touched off a purge today of fascism's chief leaders, which reached Marshal Rodolfo Graziani, who was reported to have been convicted and executed. Earlier story on page A3.
The Ypsilanti Daily Press, April 30th, 1945. Body of Mussolini lies in gutter, kicked, spat upon. Milan, April 30th, UP. The battered, begrimed body of Benito Mussolini lay today in a Milan square on a plot of dirt in a heap with 17 other corpses. The people he had ruled paid their respects to the dishonored dictator by kicking and spitting upon his remains. In the pile, lying next to Mussolini's twisted corpse, was the body of his dark-haired, pretty young mistress, Clara Petacci. Bloodstains showed crimson against her dainty, white lace-ruffled blouse, which somehow was free of the filth which covered Mussolini. In the grotesque heap were the bodies of 16 of Mussolini's fascist henchmen, like him executed by Italian patriots after a people's trial. They shared his final disgrace, as they had the infamy of his life. Mussolini died badly, said Eduardo, leader of the 10-man firing squad which sent the dictator to his death. When he was sentenced to death, the man who had ruined his career through illusions of empire ironically cried, "Let me save my life, and I will give you an empire." "No, no," were the last words from El Duce, who had said, "Yes, yes," so many times to his Axis partner, Adolf Hitler. He cried his nose, as the men of the firing squad raised their rifles to their shoulders. The execution took place at 4:20 p.m. Saturday near the town of Dongo, on Lake Como. Mussolini was killed at the villa where he had been living since their arrest last Friday night with Clara Petacci, the Rome doctor's daughter, who wanted to be a movie star. Mussolini, the jackal to the last, was caught as he attempted to flee to Switzerland in a 30-car convoy, his bulky frame cloaked in a German military overcoat to escape detection. "I heard Mussolini was arrested and taken to a villa near Dongo," said Eduardo, who commands all. See Mussolini page 2.
Wilmington Morning Star, April 30th, 1945. Mussolini reported slain by Milan patriots. Former Duce grovels and begs lenity. Body hanged after execution in public square. People kick it. Mussolini, ex-dictator. By James E. Roper Milan, April 29th, UP. Italian patriots executed Benito Mussolini yesterday, and today a howling mob is kicking and spitting on his remains lying in the center of the city where Italian fascism was born. Mussolini's face was a disdainful snarl. He died shouting "No, no" to a firing squad which took his life and that of his mistress, near the village of Dongo on Lake Como at 4:10 p.m. The body was taken to Milan and dumped in the city's square. The brains which took fascist Italy into the war ooze onto the filth of a dirt plot in the center of Milan. Along with Mussolini, the patriots killed his mistress, Clara Petacci, and 16 other fascists. Continued on page 8. Column 2. Rome satisfied at Duce's death. People of city take pride in our disposition of war criminals. Rome, April 29th, AP. Rome received word of the execution of Benito Mussolini with grim satisfaction tonight. A typical reaction was a comment by a taxi driver. That's the only thing to do with murders of thousands. They do not want any 45-day trials up there in the north. Italians in Rome and elsewhere have shown increasing pride each day as word of fresh patriot uprisings reached them. Tonight, their pride swelled over the fact that patriots had disposed of the top-ranking fascist war criminals without awaiting the arrival of Allied troops. Generally, there appeared to be greater interest over the Milan radio report of the execution of, continued on page 5, column 4.
Imperial Valley Press, April 30th, 1945. Benito Mussolini. He dies begging for life and promising kingdom. Mussolini dies coward's death. Patriots turn deaf ear to pleas for life. By James E. Roper, Milan, April 30th, UP. The broken body of Benito Mussolini lay unclaimed beside his slain mistress in the Milan morgue Monday, dishonored in death by the people he led to empire and ruin. The fallen Duce died badly in the sight of the partisan executioners who killed him and his paramour, Clara Petacci, in their hideout on Lake Como last Saturday. And the people he ruled for 2 decades paid him their last tribute by hanging his remains head down from the rafters of a gasoline station in Milan's Loreto Square. There, for a night and day, they spat upon their fallen leader, shot his body in the back, and kicked the face into a toothless, pulpy mass. Carted to morgue. When the mob tired of its ghastly sport, the bodies were taken down and dumped into an open truck. They were carted to the city morgue, and the pair were placed on a metal slab in the morgue courtyard. Someone tilted the death slab upward, so the bodies were visible to hundreds of persons still milling about the morgue, peering over the stone and plaster wall. By the time Mussolini's body reached the morgue, his jacket had been torn away, revealing his barrel chest encased in a short-sleeved undershirt. Sharing the morgue with El Duce and Clara were the bodies of 16 of his henchmen, executed like them by Italian patriots after a people's trial. They shared his final disgrace as they had the infamy of his life. Mussolini died badly, said Eduardo, leader of the 10-man firing squad which sent the dictator to his death. When he was sentenced to death, the man who had ruined his career through illusions of empire ironically cried, "Let me save my life, and I will give you an empire." Shouted "No, no, no, no," were the last words from El Duce, who had said yes, yes so many times to his Axis partner, Adolf Hitler. He cried his nose as the men of the firing squad raised their rifles to their shoulders. The execution took place at 4:20 p.m. Saturday, near the town of Dongo, on Lake Como. Mussolini was killed at the villa where he had been living since their arrest last Friday night with Clara Petacci, the Rome doctor's daughter who wanted to be a movie star. Mussolini, the jackal to the last, was caught as he attempted to flee to Switzerland in a 30-car convoy, his bulky frame cloaked in a German military overcoat to escape detection. "I heard Mussolini was arrested and taken to a villa near Dongo," said Eduardo, who commands all the partisan forces south of the Pur. "None of us wanted Mussolini to be freed or escape to Switzerland, so I sent 10 men with an officer to Dongo." Mussolini was in the cottage on the hill with Signorina Petacci. When he saw Italian officers coming to him, he thought they had come to free him, and he embraced his sweetheart. When he understood he was going to be tried, he was shocked. But our men gave them both a trial and condemned them to death. Pleaded for life. Then it was that Mussolini, who had dealt death to so many others, offered the empire he didn't have in exchange for his life. But the firing squad, men from the 52nd Garibaldi Brigade, went ahead with the execution there at the villa on the hill. Mussolini did not wear a blindfold. As the squad raised their rifles, he cried, "No, no." A second later, he fell from a bullet that entered his left forehead. Eduardo said the 16 others were examined later and shot in the town square at Dongo. They included the brother of Signorina Petacci, who tried to escape. He was shot down as he ran. "These men died well," said Eduardo. "Mussolini died badly."
The Daily Alaska Empire, April 30th, 1945. Former Italian Duce killed by shot in head. Mussolini executed by firing squad. 18 others dies with him. Mussolini, dictator. Mussolini, ex-dictator. By George Palmer, Associated Press correspondent, Milan, Italy, April 30th. Spat upon and cursed, the body of Benito Mussolini was the object today of the vengeful wrath of the Italian people. The former Italian dictator, his beautiful 25-year-old mistress, and 17 fascist leaders were shot to death by Italian patriots at Galano de Mezzogiorno, near Como, Saturday afternoon. Also taken prisoner was Mussolini's war minister, Rudolfo Graziani. Mussolini and his followers were attempting to flee to Switzerland. Graziani declared he sought to give himself up. There was no formal trial, and after the executions at 4:10 p.m., the bodies were piled into a truck and brought to Milan for public exhibition. Yesterday, the corpse of the 61-year-old former dictator was hung by the heels in the Piazza Quindici Martiri in Milan. By his side was the body of his mistress, blood smeared across her breast. Flanking them on both sides were the bodies of 5 other fascist leaders. Spit upon body. Angry Milan citizens pushed and shoved against the partisans guarding the bodies. Some succeeded in breaking through and spitting upon El Duce's body. One man emptied the clip of his automatic pistol into the lifeless form. Another punched the once famed jutting jaw. Mussolini was shot through the head by the partisans after he was captured Friday by a sergeant approaching the Swiss border. He and the other fascist leaders were fleeing in a truck convoy. Mussolini was garbed in a German officer's coat and was driving north when the sergeant spotted him. He spent Friday night in a cell at San Domingo prison in Como. He was reported in a terrible state of agitation and made attempts to strike up conversations with his guards. Last quotes. "Why is no one here to defend me?" he was quoted as saying. Later he was reported to have told the men who ordered him shot, "Save my life and I will give you an empire." He died shouting "No, no" to the firing squad, eyewitnesses recounted. The bullet that killed him entered from the back in the manner prescribed by Italian tradition for dishonored persons. Purge start, Milan, April 30th. The execution of Mussolini has touched off a purge of fascists, and other leaders are being ferreted out and shot. Execution okayed, Rome, April 30th. The Italian government, through its Commissioner for the Punishment of War Crimes, today endorsed the action of Italian patriots in the execution of Benito Mussolini. Fathered fascism. The Italian peasant who was Benito Mussolini flashed to world fame as the father of a political system over which nations fought around the world. For nearly 20 years, the founder of fascism took the balcony spotlight, which was taken away when a German house painter, imitating the fascist system, forged a mightier totalitarian machine, and Mussolini took a back seat from then on. Between 1922 and 1942, the plump man with the bull neck imposed his will on more than 40 million people, holding them in line with his frequent balcony addresses and his army. His downfall began when he cast his lot with Hitler in the birth of the Rome-Berlin Axis. Mussolini plunged Italy into the Second World Conflict by jumping on already defeated France. From that time on, Italy knew what war could be like. Tremendous damaging air raids by the British, later by the Americans, contributed to the lowering morale of the Italians, and the Italian armies failed to measure up to the boasts of their leader. Eventually came the Allied North African campaign, Sicily and Italy, and the collapse of the Italian government. Mussolini was rescued by German paratroopers. Son of blacksmith. Mussolini, son of a blacksmith, was born July 29, 1883. He is said to have had a hard boyhood and continued on page 5.
The Evening Star, May 1st, 1945. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. Morgue where Mussolini lies pictured as chamber of horror. New bold noise requires minutes to realize grotesque object on slab built in empire. By New Bold Noise Jr., Star War Correspondent. Milan, May 1st. Here is the morgue. From the outside, it is a low, pleasant red brick building, eminently neat, cleanly functional. If this building were a state, its trains would run on time. Partisan guard will let us pass, for we are here to learn. Cover your nose and mouth with a handkerchief as you enter. Inside is a chamber of horrors. What is this thing in the absurdly small, oblong, wooden box just inside the door? Of all the things a man can dream, this surely is the most horrible. Look at it closely without realizing too much what you're seeing. If you let it sink in too much, you will be sick. At the bottom, there's a pair of breeches on a pair of legs. That much is clear. We cannot see the feet, for they are covered. In the middle is what appears to be a small torso. It is gray and covered with hairs. There are several holes in it, and a large seam about a foot long running down the middle. It looks as if it had been split open and then sewed up with heavy string, threaded in a spiral through the pouting dead flesh. There are also two spindly arms that end in silly little putty-like shoulders. There is something like a head. It is roughly elliptic, but it cannot be a head. There is no hair on it. There are two holes which might be eyes, but they are not where eyes should be. There is no nose. Where the nose belongs, there is a deep depression from which the upper and lower halves. See noise, page A3.
Monitor Leader, May 1st, 1945. Braggart Mussolini pays for crimes. A sawdust Caesar dies badly. Milan, May 1st, AP. The beaten, misshapen corpse of Benito Mussolini lay in a rude wooden coffin in the Milan morgue today awaiting further disposition while conflicting reports spread over the fate of his military chieftain, Marshal Rodolfo Graziani. One report said the former chief of staff of the Italian army was at Allied headquarters, where he had been taken by an American officer just before Graziani was scheduled to go on trial before a partisan group. Other unofficial advices received at National Liberation Committee headquarters in Milan said Graziani had been sentenced to death and executed immediately. Tribute to patriots. Italian partisans, revering their own patriot dead, attended funeral services and held demonstrations throughout the city for their comrades who fell to fascist and German bullets earlier in the week. From all appearances, leftist groups already had achieved efficient organization in Milan. Correspondents were escorted from the airport to the city by partisans in automobiles manned by machine gun-toting patriot guards. Members of the Garibaldi, all communist, brigades, their strength estimated at approximately 15,000, appeared to be in full control. Placards proclaiming "Down with the monarchy" were prominently displayed. The bodies of Mussolini, his young mistress, Cloretta Petacci, and fascist leaders executed with him were removed to the morgue reportedly at the request. See Mussolini, page 2.
The Waterbury Democrat, May 1st, 1945. End of trial for Mussolini. In Milan's Plaza Loreto, the bodies of Benito Mussolini and his mistress, Clara Petacci, are exposed to the public, hanging by their heels. At right, partisans are hoisting the body of Lieutenant General Achille Strachey. This picture was obtained by the New York Times and sent by radio from Bern to New York. Ignominious burial given ex-dictator. By James Roper, Milan, May 1st, UP. Benito Mussolini and his mistress, Clara Petacci, were buried secretly in unmarked graves in the Potter's Field of the Maggiore Cemetery late yesterday. It was revealed today. Former Fascist Party Secretary Achille Strachey, who was executed yesterday, was interred a short distance away in the same plot of ground. The only witnesses to the ignominious burials were 15 members of the cemetery staff, who were sworn to secrecy to prevent mobs from learning the grave's location and possibly exhuming the remains of the former dictator. The three bodies were in rough, unpainted pine coffins, the tops of which were screwed on. A military chaplain offered a brief Catholic benediction for all three as they were lowered into the ground. An Italian Red Cross truck had transported the three bodies from a morgue to the burial site under some fir trees. Vittorio Vertova, cemetery director who supervised the burials, said the brain had been removed from Mussolini's body and criminologists were examining it. Undertakers did their best to repair the damage done Mussolini's corpse, which had been stoned, kicked, spat upon, and shot at by the Milan mob in 2 days of unparalleled crowd hysteria. They built up his face so that it had regained some of its old-time arrogance. His mouth was stuffed to hide the loss of his teeth, which had been kicked out by the mob. A routine autopsy was performed yesterday because no doctor had it, continued on page 4.
Wilmington Morning Star, May 1st, 1945. Shooting of Mussolini related by executioner. By George Bria, Milan. April 30th, AP. The beaten, misshapen body of Benito Mussolini lay tonight in a rude wooden coffin in the Milan morgue while still vengeful Italian partisans, moving against other former fascist leaders, were reported already to have tried and executed Marshal Rodolfo Graziani. Headquarters of the National Liberation Committee received an unofficial report that Graziani, former chief of staff of the Italian army and loser of the First Libyan campaign, had been sentenced this morning and the execution carried out immediately, but there was not immediate confirmation. Demonstrations continued in Milan during the day as funerals were held for patriots who were killed in the revolt last week. However, the prefect of the Milan region, acting upon instructions by the Italian government and allied military authorities, issued a proclamation ordering immediate cessation of summary judgments and arbitrary executions. Violators of the order were warned that Italian and AMC authorities will adopt extremely severe measures. The bodies of Mussolini, 61-year-old former dictator and fascist leader, his beautiful young mistress, Claretta Petacci, and 17 of his fascist followers were removed to the morgue today. Continued on page 3, column 4.